From victim to survivor, how I overcame emotional abuse and secured my own future. When I think about that day, it feels like everything is still going on in my head. My name is Tiago. I'm 16 years old, and I never imagined my parents would leave me alone in a parking lot, as if I were an object to be discarded. I remember it was a trip that should have been fun, but suddenly it became the worst nightmare of my life. I tried to understand what was happening, but my head could only spin between fear, anger, and shame. I felt small, useless, as if I had no value. It was impossible to understand why my parents, who were supposed to care for me, treated me this way. And in that moment, their abandonment was more than physical. It was emotional, psychological. I was alone, confused, unsure of where to turn or who to trust. The tears wouldn't stop flowing, and the feeling that no one cared about me crushed me. Every car that passed seemed to laugh at my helplessness. I had no words to describe what I felt. I only knew I wanted to disappear, vanish, but at the same time, a part of me knew I needed to survive. I tried to call someone, anyone, but there was no one around who could truly help me. The cold and wind only heightened my feeling of abandonment, and in the midst of it all, a mixture of anger and confusion washed over me. How could they be so cold, so calculating? I felt my whole body tremble, but not just from the cold. It was pure fear, fear of never having anyone who truly cared about me again. I had to get up, but my legs felt like lead. Each step was an effort, and every time I looked at the empty parking lot, I felt my childhood slipping through my fingers. I still had hope, but it was a fragile, almost unreal hope. Then a woman arrived who seemed to realize I had nowhere to go. Donna Lucia led me into her car with a gentleness that made me want to cry with relief. I had never felt such a contrast between what I had experienced and what I was beginning to experience at that moment. The warmth of that car, the way she spoke to me as if I truly mattered, was the first time I felt like there might be a way out of this nightmare. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother, my sister, and my father. Anger still burned inside, mixed with a sense of helplessness. I wanted to scream, hit, cry, but I was too tired for anything. The car felt like a temporary shelter, and with every passing kilometer, I realized I was leaving behind something I could no longer fix. The feeling was painful, but also strangely liberating, because finally someone saw me for who I really was. A scared teenager, but still alive and worthy of care. When we arrived at the shelter, I was introduced to Mr. Antonio, who had a firm but welcoming manner. He calmly explained that I was no longer alone, that someone would protect me. For the first time in my life, I felt my body could relax a little, that the tightness in my chest could ease. Donna Lucia prepared something to eat and tried to make me feel at home, but I still couldn't eat properly, not because I wasn't hungry, but because the feeling of abandonment was still there, present in every thought. I felt ashamed to cry in front of them, but I couldn't help it. Each tear felt like it carried years of accumulated pain every time I tried to get my parents' attention and was ignored or emotionally punished. I remembered the times my sister Bianca remained silent, as if trying to defend herself were a crime. And in that moment, I realized that I was not only physically alone, but emotionally. I still carried the weight of my blood family. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion, wanting to embrace this new family that welcomed me, but at the same time, the fear of trusting completely still paralyzed me. I wondered how it was possible for someone to truly love me, someone who wasn't interested in controlling or hurting me, but little by little, I began to believe it was possible. Social worker Helena came to visit us that same day, and I remember her looking at me in a way I'd never seen before, without judgment. Just attentiveness and empathy. She explained what was happening, that my mother would probably say I was making up stories, that my father would try to justify his actions, but that I needed to tell the truth. I felt a strange strength within me, a mixture of fear and courage. For the first time, I realized there could be justice, that my words could carry weight. I was nervous, but also determined to tell everything, regardless of the consequences for my parents. It was my life at stake, and I finally understood that I had the right to be heard. On the way back, my heart raced because I had never truly spoken to an adult about the abuse. Memories of the times I was ignored, criticized, called a liar came flooding back. But at the same time, each memory served to give me strength, to remind me that I had survived this far and that I could finally have some form of protection and care. That night, lying in my temporary room, I felt something I had never felt before, a modicum of security. I was still afraid, still angry and sad, but something inside me told me there could be a different life. I closed my eyes and thought about my sister, how I needed to be strong for her too. The feeling of helplessness began to give way to a strange but welcome feeling, hope. For the first time, I realized there could be a future where I would no longer have to live in constant fear, where my feelings would not be ignored, where I could simply be Tiago without having to hide anything to survive. And in that moment, even with the exhaustion, the pain and the uncertainty, I decided I wouldn't give up. It was the beginning of something new, of a life that, despite everything, could be mine. The next morning, I woke to the sound of coffee brewing and the smell of toast. It was simple, but to me it meant everything. For years, mornings at my house were filled with silence, tension, and cold stares. I'd grown accustomed to waking up, dreading what was to come, always trying to guess my mother's mood so as not to provoke an argument. At Donna Lucia's house, it was different. The silence wasn't heavy. It was peace. I sat at the table, somewhat unsure of what to do. She asked if I wanted milk or coffee, and I took a while to answer, as if either choice could be wrong. She just smiled and told me I could relax. It sounds silly, but hearing that broke me. I didn't know what relaxation meant. I was always tense, afraid of making a mistake, of disappointing someone. And there, for the first time, I realized the world could be lighter. Even so, there was still a part of me that doubted. Was this temporary? Would they get tired of me too? These questions wouldn't leave my mind. It was hard to trust. But Donna Lucia's calm demeanor and So Antonio's protective gaze slowly began to break down the walls I had built within myself. Few days later, I was called into a meeting with the social worker and my parents. Just the thought of seeing my mother again made my stomach churn. I knew she would try to turn everything around, and that's exactly what happened. She looked at me with that cold, contemptuous look and said I always liked to dramatize, that I made up stories to get attention. My father, as usual, remained silent, shaking his head, pretending everything was fine. I stayed quiet for a while, but when Helena asked me what I had to say, something inside me burst. I told her everything. I talked about the abandonment, the way they treated me, the constant fear, the times I begged to be heard and was ignored. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. It was as if I were letting out years of suffocation. My mother started screaming, lost control. And when she tried to hit my father in front of everyone, I realized, finally, the masks had slipped. I wasn't the problem anymore. It was their home that was sick, and in that moment, I felt relief mixed with pain. I had lost my parents, but for the first time, I had gained myself. After that meeting, things changed forever. I was officially placed under guardianship, and despite my fear of everything that was to come, I felt it was the first step toward rebuilding my life. Donna Lucia hugged me tightly when she learned of the decision, and it was the first time I felt a hug that was not just physical, but emotional. A hug from someone who truly cared. She told. And me, I could breathe now, that the worst was over. I wanted to believe, but deep down I knew I still had a long way to go. The nights were still difficult. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking I had done something wrong, that my parents would come to get me, to punish me. It took a while for my body to understand that the danger was over, But little by little, I learned to trust the small gestures, the hot coffee, the conversations at the table, Mr. Antonio's quiet but protective manner. Each day there was a step away from the past and closer to a new life. When Bianca showed up at the shelter, I could hardly believe it. She looked different, thin, with a lost look in her eyes, but alive. My heart raced. I wanted to hug her, but I wasn't sure I could. She stood at the door, crying silently, and it was Donna Lucia who approached and took her in first. Then she looked at me and said softly, "You were right." Those 3 words broke and healed me at the same time. I'd waited so long to hear my sister acknowledge what we'd been through. She told me she'd tried to run away from home after another fight, that her mother had locked her in her room and only emerged when the police arrived. Her courage gave me even more strength. I understood that our story wasn't just about pain, but about survival. We'd been hurt, but we were still here, breathing, trying to start over. And seeing Bianca welcomed by the same family that saved me was confirmation that love, when it's true, has the power to fix even the seemingly impossible. Even with all the support, fear still haunted me. Fear of repeating the same mistakes, fear of trusting too much and being hurt again. I started therapy, and there I understood that trauma doesn't disappear overnight. It only weakens over time as we learn to cope with it. Helena, the social worker, always said it wasn't my fault. And at first, I thought she was just saying that to comfort me. But one day, after a difficult session, I realized she was right. I was a child, trying to survive in an environment where love was a rare currency. No child deserves to feel like they have to be perfect to deserve affection. None. That reality slowly sank in, and when it did, it was like breathing after years underwater. There was still pain, but there was also room for hope. For the first time, I began to envision a future without fear, where I could just be myself, without having to apologize for existing. The first time I left the house alone in so long, I felt a mixture of fear and freedom I'd never experienced before. Going to school or the supermarket with Donna Lucia and Seu Antonio was unlike anything I'd ever known. I didn't have to worry about scolding for small things or disapproving looks. The feeling that someone truly cared about me was almost strange. I remember once, on my way to school, I passed a parking lot and felt butterflies in my stomach. It was the same parking lot where my parents had abandoned me. My body trembled, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was as if I were facing the past, acknowledging that it existed, but that I had survived. This gave me enormous strength. I began to realize that I could make decisions without fear of punishment, that my opinion mattered, that my feelings were valid. Every small choice reminded me that my life was no longer in the hands of people who hurt me. I could just be Tiago, without masks, without fear. I started dreaming again, about little things. Real friends, good grades, the future I wanted to build. And most importantly, I began to realize that my sister could have those dreams too, that she no longer needed to live in fear or guilt for existing. That day had a profound impact on me because it was when I understood that the change wasn't just external, it was within me too. When Bianca started talking more about what she'd been through, I felt a little guilty for not having been able to protect her sooner. But at the same time, I was proud of her courage. She'd faced moments alone that I never imagined, and finally had someone who welcomed her and listened. Every word she said reminded me that our suffering wasn't our fault, but rather our parents' neglect and coldness. We'd spent so long believing we were the problem that we were in the wrong. Now, little by little, we understood that we were victims, but victims who still had a chance to start over. Feeling that she trusted me gave me the strength to keep going, to not let myself sink into anger or pain. I realized that overcoming wasn't just about forgetting or distancing myself from the past, but about learning to live with it, about transforming pain into strength. And little by little, this strength began to manifest itself in small victories. A night's sleep without nightmares, a sincere conversation with the therapist, a smile from Bianca after school. Every small but significant detail made me realize that I was changing and that life could be better than I imagined. I also started getting more involved at school. At first, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was afraid of being judged, that someone would discover my past and look at me differently. But Marcia, my advisor, helped me realize that I didn't need to hide anything. She encouraged me to study, to organize myself, to make plans. For the first time, I felt like I had a future that could be mine. Every lesson learned, every small achievement at school gave me confidence. I no longer needed to be invisible or flawless to get attention. I could just be me with my flaws and pain and still deserve respect. It was a slow but rewarding process. I realized that life could be joyful even after so much sadness, and that gave me hope that my sister could find the same path. One of the most defining moments was when I realized I could enjoy the little things without guilt. Simple things: eating a snack I liked, watching a movie, talking about music with Bianca. For years I had repressed my feelings, as if showing joy was wrong, as if I wasn't entitled to good times. But there, in the safety of that new family, I began to realize I deserved to feel happiness. With every laugh, every sincere hug, I felt my body relax and my heart open. It was a silent but profound shift. I began to recognize myself as someone who could live without constant fear, someone who could be loved and protected. The transformation also came in the way I viewed my parents. It wasn't just fear or anger anymore. It was clarity. I understood that they would never change, that my love for them could no longer bind me. The pain still existed, but I could separate the past from the present. I had the right to move forward. For the first time, I felt free to be who I was, to build my own story, without their mistakes defining my life. And this, as simple as it may seem, was a huge milestone in my life. Over time, I began to realize that overcoming didn't mean forgetting everything I'd been through, but learning to cope with it. Some days I still woke up with a sinking feeling in my stomach, remembering the abandonment in the parking lot or the arguments at home. But now I had tools to deal with these feelings. Donna Lucia and Mr. Antonio helped me create a routine, a sense of normalcy I'd never known. I started sleeping better, studying with focus, and allowing myself moments of guilt-free joy. It was a slow but necessary process. Each small step was a silent victory. I realized I was rebuilding not only my life, but also my self-esteem. The constant fear began to fade, and in its place came a sense of security I'd never felt before. It was strange getting used to it, but it was liberating. And seeing my sister also going through this process was a daily motivation. The pain was still there, of course, but I finally felt I could manage it, that I no longer needed to be held hostage by the past. Every loving gesture from my foster family reminded me that love exists. Even when our blood family has failed, I began to believe that I could have a different life and that I was worth fighting for. One of the things that helped me most was realizing I didn't have to face everything alone. Therapy, conversations with Helena, and the support of Donna Lucia and Seu Antonio were crucial. Before, any problem felt overwhelming because I had no one I could truly trust. Now, I had adults who listened to me, who protected me, and who gave me space to feel without judgment. This sense of belonging, of not being alone, began to completely change my perspective. I realized I could trust the right people, and that this didn't make me weak, but stronger. I also began to notice small changes within myself. More patience, less explosive anger, a greater ability to see solutions instead of problems. I still felt angry at my parents, of course, but that anger no longer consumed me. It existed as a reminder of what I had overcome, rather than as something that defined me. Each day, each small step, was a brick in the reconstruction of my life. When my sister began to open up more, it was as if our stories intertwined in her overcoming. She began to genuinely smile, to talk about her dreams and fears without fear of criticism. Seeing this gave me a sense of mission. I needed to help her stay strong, to trust herself. We began to share small everyday things, conversations about school, friends, music, and this strengthened our bond. For the first time, we felt like a team, that we weren't alone in the world. And realizing that her courage came from small actions, from facing each day with the certainty that she deserved care and love, inspired me deeply. I knew that the overcoming wasn't just mine, but hers as well. And this gave me the strength to keep moving forward, to not let anything stop us from having a dignified and happy life. A moment I'll never forget was when I was called to visit my old neighborhood. I passed the parking lot where my parents left me, and I felt that same cold feeling in my chest. But this time it wasn't fear, it was recognition. I survived. I was alive, and I had a real family by my side. It was as if I could finally close a chapter of my life without letting it define who I am. I felt proud of myself, of having resisted, of having faced so much suffering and still believing in better days. It was a silent but intense turning point that made me realize that true change begins from within. I was no longer just the victim of cruel abandonment. I was someone who had the power to rebuild my own life. In the end, I realized my story didn't have to be just about pain. It could be about courage, resilience, and love. I still have difficult moments. I still remember what happened and feel sadness and anger. But now I know I can handle it, that I no longer have to carry it all alone. I learned that overcoming is not a destination, but a daily journey, full of small steps that add up until suddenly you realize you've changed, that you're stronger, and that you deserve to be happy. And with each passing day, I feel more confident, more capable of facing any challenge, and more grateful for having found people who showed me what true family is. Over time, I realized I also needed to forgive myself. For years, I carried guilt, believing the abuse was somehow my responsibility. I thought if I had been better, more obedient, quieter, things would have been different. But that wasn't true. No child deserves to suffer at the hands of those they're supposed to protect. Recognizing this was liberating, even if it hurt at first. I began to look at my story clearly. What happened doesn't define who I am today, but it taught me the importance of fighting for respect and love. Every tear, every night of fear, every feeling of abandonment was transformed into learning and strength. I still feel sadness, but now it coexists with hope and determination. And this change makes me believe I can build a full life, even after so much suffering. One of the biggest challenges was still dealing with the fear of trust. I had built very high emotional walls, and breaking them down wasn't easy. But over time, I realized that trust is built through consistent actions, not empty words. With every loving gesture, every protective act, I allowed myself to believe that I deserved to be loved. This changed everything. My self-esteem, my relationships, even my way of seeing the world. I began to feel more secure, more capable of facing challenges and making choices that truly mattered to me. The pain of the past was still present, but it no longer dominated me. I had discovered that overcoming grief is about persisting, even when all seems lost, and about finding strength in unexpected places. Watching my sister grow stronger was a constant motivation. She, who for so long had been subdued by our parents' coldness, began to find her voice and assert herself. Seeing this so closely gave me a sense of purpose. I needed to be there, not just as a sibling, but as someone who knew that life can get better, that we deserve care and respect. This brought us together in a way I never imagined possible. Her every achievement, every small act of courage resonated with me, reminding me that we survived together and that we can continue to grow together despite everything we've been through. Today, I can say I've found a balance I've never known before. I still have painful memories. I still feel angry sometimes, but I've learned to deal with these feelings without letting them consume me. I discovered that my life doesn't have to be defined by abandonment or neglect. I can be happy, I can build healthy relationships, I can study, dream, and plan my future. That turning point when I was finally welcomed by someone who truly cared was the turning point that changed my trajectory. Life wasn't perfect, but it became possible. And that's huge for someone who spent so long thinking they deserved nothing. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be, don't give up on yourself. Seek support, trust the right people, and allow yourself to feel, even if the pain is intense. Overcoming adversity isn't linear. It doesn't happen overnight, but every step counts. And even with fear, even with pain, it's possible to start over. Today, I see my life through different eyes, full of hope, full of possibilities, and with the certainty that, despite everything, we survive and can be happy. It's a daily battle, but every victory, no matter how small, is worth the effort. And that's what keeps me strong, every day, in the certainty that I can build a better life for myself and my sister.